quite warm outside. It's my pleasure to introduce a couple of speakers to you. The first one is Ewan Browl, who's a naval architect and the sub-regional director for ABL. And since joining ABL in 2015, Ewan's delivered marine warranty survey and engineering consultancy services across the major offshore energy projects in the UK and Canada. So with his hands-on experience of managing and reviewing complex marine operations, including the decommissioning of oil production platforms, Ewan brings deep technical insight and practical knowledge to the field. His background in naval architecture, coupled with years of supporting clients in high-stakes offshore activities, makes him the ideal person to deliver today's presentation on decommissioning in the energy sector. The second half of the presentation this afternoon is given by Stanley Pritchard, and Stanley is a naval architect also, who's on the graduate development program, currently working for Longitude Engineering, which is our in-house design bureau. And we're pleased to have him return this month to present the maritime casualty data. So usual caveats apply, Chatham House rules, and remember that the information contained in today's presentation and any opinions or comments expressed are those of the presenters and not necessarily those of ABL. And at the end of the briefing today, if you could take time to fill out the online survey, we would really appreciate that. It's critical for our CPD accredited status and allows us to continue to offer you one CPD point per briefing. And it also means that we can look actively at how we can improve our presentations to you. Use the QR code on the screen or displayed outside the room to download the survey. Neptune Declaration. So the Neptune Declaration, for those of you that don't know what it is an initiative that was started in 2021 during COVID. It's an initiative to improve the welfare of seafarers. It started out as a mechanism to assist with crew that couldn't be changed from ships, and it's now sort of moved on from that to become a broader initiative to improve the welfare of seafarers. Neptune, of course, the Roman god of the sea, as opposed to Poseidon, who's the Greek god of the sea. And as of 2024, there are 850 organisations that have signed up to the Neptune Declaration, of which ABL is one. And if your organisations are not already members, then maybe you might like to consider that. So moving on to the presentation, I think most of us turn on the electricity from the light switch and expect it to be there, and we don't really give much thought about where it's come from or the installations that have been put in place to provide that electricity, such as oil rigs and offshore wind farms. And probably we consider even less when those platforms are taken away. So that forms the basis of today's talk, and I'll hand over to Ewan. Thank you.
Concerned after that glowing. Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. And as it's our maritime briefing for the CDP accreditation, we'll start by just running through the learning objectives for today. You'll be able to understand the scale and scope of the offshore decommissioning market. You'll be able to evaluate current strategies and techniques used in asset removal. You'll be able to identify key risks associated with offshore decommissioning activities, and you'll gain an insight into emerging trends, regulatory developments, and evolving industry priorities shaping the future of decommissioning. I would also just like to say thank you, Paul, for the introduction. Thank you for being in the room today, and thank you for the people online joining us. Before we get going, I just wanted to say A few words about myself. So I'm a degree discipline engineer, like Paul mentioned, with over 20 years experience in the maritime and energy sector. I spent 10 years in the defence sector, designing and building ships before joining ABL's predecessor, LOC, in 2015. I joined in Aberdeen before moving to Canada in 2017, where my passion for decommissioning started. For the last 2.5 years, I've been based back in London and running the London office as well as a sub-regional director. My decommission experience has included operations offshore Canada, Australia, the Gulf of Mexico, and across the North Sea. So first of all, we'll take a quick look at the size of the decommissioning market as it stands. The graph shows the decommissioning spend region by region year on year, and the donut graph represents the percentage size of the decommissioning market by the region between 2021 and 2030. The main driver is the aging of offshore assets, and probably no surprise, Europe leads the way. APAC is projected to spend on decommissioning is expected to grow to 3 billion by 2030, and this represents an annual growth rate of 9.5% between 2024 to 2032. To note for APAC, over the next 50 years, Australia is expected to see $40 billion worth of spend in decommissioning activity. And recently, a JV between Shell, Reliance Industry Limited, and the Oil and Natural Gas Corporation wrapped up its first offshore facilities decom project in India. North America is projected expenditures to reach 15 billion by 2030 each year, growing at an annual rate of 7% from 2024 to 2030. Also of importance is the Gulf of Mexico. Although it may not be the driver in terms of volume, it does lead the market in terms of volume of assets that need to be decommissioned. A significant cost driver in decommissioning are the regulations regarding decommissioning activities, which vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. From my personal experience, decommissioning activities in Canada, the UK continental shelf, and Australia tend to be more expensive and complicated than those in the Gulf of Mexico. So let's home in a little bit into the UK. The graph here shows year-on-year decommissioning expenditure split by decommissioning activity. Nearly 50% of decommissioning spend is related to the well decommissioning and plug and abandonment activities. Decommissioning accounted for 12% of the total oil and gas expenditure on the UK continental shelf in 2023, and this is expected to increase to 33% by 2030 and be higher than capital investment. The graphs indicate a spike in 2030, which is linked to a high number of wells currently slated for decom. However, it's unlikely to be delivered, and it's expected to flatten out into the 30s as plans become more advanced over the next few years. Another interesting aspect is a predicted increase in demand in the offshore wind sector. It is expected that over 600 turbines will need to be decommissioned by 2030, and this will significantly increase past that point, which is clearly identified on the graph. Although the offshore wind decommissioning market is limited right now, the construction activities has an associated demand on installation vessels, and this has a key impact on the oil and gas decommissioning sector and limiting vessel availability. Great. So we now know a bit about the decommissioning sector. We know that it's large, and we know it will continue to grow, and this is indicated by the graphic on the right-hand side. But what does this mean, or how does it impact decommissioning projects and the risks associated with it? There's a conflict between increased spending versus a drive to reduce the cost of decommissioning. Oil and gas majors hold the burden of the costs and would like to reduce this as much as possible, as it's an asset on their P&L. The engineering, procurement, removal, decommissioning, a bit of a mouthful, EPRD contractor space is highly competitive due to the limited number of them and available vessels. There's a large demand on installation vessels being driven by the renewable sector. Therefore, there's a high appetite to get jobs done quicker, vessels operating at their operational limits in order to get the job done, and repurposing vessels or modifying vessels to perform activities which they may not have been designed for, and again, might push them over their operational limit. All of which can increase pressure and risk when it comes to decommissioning operations. Okay. We spoke about the current size of the market, competitive nature of the EPDR space and the demand on suitable vessels. Before going further, I thought it was important to baseline our understanding of decommissioning. On the screen is a particular definition: retrieval of shore for reuse, recycling, or deconstruction of abandoned or disused offshore installations or structures, while ensuring proper regard for safety, the environment, of legitimate users of the sea, and economic factors. An area that's not in that definition, is that's currently becoming more and more popular, is looking at reusing the offshore facility, particularly the jackets, for repurposing in situ. The neat diagram from the OG UK decommissioning provides a graphical representation of the different stages involved in the decommissioning project, from the project management, well decommissioning, plug and abandonment, cleaning, preparation, removal, and disposal. We'll hone in on 3 areas of the decommissioning process that the marine warranty surveyor focuses on as part of their decommissioning all risk insurance policy, which are topside preparation, topside removal, and substructure removal. There is also the transportation and loading operations at the recycling yard, but we'll not focus on these today. A key theme from here on in is to avoid pollution events and to avoid a wreck removal operation. The first step is to ensure the platform is prepared as much as possible ahead of the removal operation. Activities associated with the preparation works that are of keen focus to the MWS are platform surveys, which include structural surveys and weight control, and reinstallation of lifting points or primary structure for lifting that may have been removed once installed. I would highlight the risk associated with installing structural reinforcement, removing pipe work, modules, work overside, with potentially asbestos in the topside modules, are all challenging risks that need to be managed alongside the more critical activities for the removal works. So we look closer now at topside removal methods. By far the most popular is reverse installation. This is effectively removing the platform in the same way it was installed using the same or reinstated lift points. Piecemeal, says what it's on the tin, chop it up and remove it in sections. And then we also need to consider single lift or tandem lifts. Which methods depend on a number of factors: weight, size, physical condition, the contractor being used, the vessel availability, transportation method to do dismantling in the recycling yard, the field layout, and of course, the cost. The risks I would like to highlight that requires most attention from my personal experience are verifying the platform's weight and centre of gravity. This is estimated using as-built information through life weight control reports and surveys, which if incorrect can cause major issues when we're lifting. Also, verification of the structural strength. This is done by reviewing as-built installation information, visual inspection, NDE, and calculation and analysis. Other key risks are dropped objects and the potential pollution. I've been involved in a project where a fire started during hot works when removing sea fastenings on a barge due to spilt residual flammable liquids during the transportation. Again, we want to do all this to avoid a wreck removal operation. The jacket removal methods and deciding which method is similar to those listed for the top sides. However, reverse installation is only partially achievable. Same location and reinstated lift points can be used, but not often the whole jacket can be retrieved. Also, in some jurisdictions, only the top part of the jacket is removed to avoid future navigational risks. Also, in some jurisdictions, toppling of the jacket on the seabed is acceptable. It brings up the question, and more of a debate in the industry, about the idea of artificially reefing the jackets or proportions of them compared to removing them. It can be argued in removing the jacket, one is removing a marine habitat that has been created over 20, 40 years. The picture here is one of the jackets I took out, and it's absolutely caked in marine growth, and the jacket has only been in for 10, 15 years. Again, there are a number of risks and challenges that are similar to the topside removal. Ones that I would highlight that are different are flooded members of the jacket that can affect the weight and COG. Subsea cutting, the time it takes to do the cutting and the verification that the cut is complete before attempting the lift. Time constraint. The operational window needs to include the final cut to the jacket, the lift, the land on the barge, and sea fastening. In fact, in some circumstances, it also needs to include the transport sail back to harbour or safe haven. Lift and carry in the crane huts back to shore rather than landing on a barge. Again, this is done in the industry. It doesn't necessarily increase any risks, but it just means what you focus on changes. Again, we're looking at this to avoid a wreck removal operation. So we quickly looked at removal methods and potential risks. I would now just like to switch focus and look at some emerging trends, focus areas in the decommissioning, particularly low carbon emissions. Items on the table I would like to flag are low emission vessels. This often means using smaller vessels, which increases the risk of the vessel operating on their limits or even above their limits. Building on that is the trend in delivering removal operations with a collaboration with smaller contractors. Not only do we have the risk as before with smaller vessels, we now have an increased number of interfaces between contractors and potentially the uncertainty around the responsibility and accountability during the operation. One that's becoming more popular, and I mentioned earlier, is the repurposing of offshore platforms for carbon capture storage projects or for offshore substations to support the offshore wind industry. There are a few examples ABL has been involved in that follow these. First of all, Sea Monster. I don't know if anyone's heard of it, but it was an art project to increase public engagement to showcase renewable energy and sustainability through holding the expedition on a decommissioned oil and gas platform reclaimed to Western-super-Mare. There's also L7 decommissioning in Tyra, where they repurposed the old jackets to install a CCS, a carbon capture storage injection platform. Also on L7 to note is the deliberate use of low emission vessels. So in summary, and the takeaway messages, decommissioning is growing. We've shown that. There's an overriding preference for the reverse insulation method where possible. The major risks, structural integrity, weight, and COG verification, and verification of subsea cuts. There's a current focus on repurposing offshore facilities, either for carbon capture storage or to reuse the jacket for the offshore substation for renewable energy. The message I still leave you with is we want to avoid a wreck removal operation. That concludes the presentation this afternoon. So I don't know if there's any questions in the room. Yes, sir.
I'm Mark Window from International Public Salvage. You didn't mention anything about the amount of drill cuttings at the bottom of the jacket. What is the latest theory on how to deal with those, considering that anything drilled before 1990 would be oil drill cutting, and that we get in situ.
Sure. I probably don't have the right answer for you on that, considering the scopes of work I look at. What I would say is, I think, oh, sorry. Yeah, the question was how do we deal with the drill cuttings as we do the cutting, right?
Yeah, there's mounds and mounds of drill cuttings out, like we see all over the place, including through 1995. And it's been theorised that the removal of that will enable this oil to get stuck in there and the other contaminants that come up to move the sea. Sure. Or do you just leave it there to continue on to the continuity?
Sure. I was just repeating it because online they can't hear you because the microphone. So I was just explaining I'm probably not the best person to answer that question. However, I think it depends on jurisdiction to jurisdiction and the focus, and the focus on the cleanup effectively. yeah, I can't answer that question right now, unfortunately. Sorry. Any others?
Regards to the offshore wind farm, would it just be the turbines that would be replaced, or obviously the wind is a incident source of power, so the actual energy is there and it's run out? What is it there?
So-
What is it that's being decommissioned?
Okay, yeah, so the question in the room was what's been decommissioned when we start looking at offshore wind farms, whether it's the foundations or whether it's the monopile or the turbine itself. I think, and this is just my thoughts, I think there will be a driver that's seeing whether they can reuse the foundations as much as possible. But I think the stipulation is they need to remove everything and leave it as they found it. But I think as we go through this journey, and it's only its infancy at the minute, I think there'll be more and more thoughts about how to make use of the foundations effectively. I mean, from an engineering perspective, the thing I consider is, the foundations are built or designed based on a certain set of parameters. So if they were going to reuse them in the future, then they need to make sure that they're suitable and strong enough, effectively. The loads. Yeah, we'll go here. Phil. No, so again, it's quite interesting actually, and again, it's driven by jurisdiction. So some jurisdictions say you have to decommission and recycle them in country. So there's a big driver, or they have to pay significant penalties or tax to export them. So in Australia, they're currently looking at repurposing some shore bases to deal with the decommissioning assets for the Exxon project in the south of Australia. In Canada, we did sell them across over to ABL in the UK because the facilities locally, they did an economic evaluation and found that it'd be cheaper it'd be more viable to send the topsides and jackets to the UK on barges for transatlantic tow compared to doing it in Canada because there wasn't any suitable facilities. But in general, what we see is the recycling or the dismantling is done as local as possible. Right. I think sorry, Phil, what's the question? Yes, so the question in the room is whether the majors are making any money back from the scrap material, and the answer is that no. The decommissioning yard or the people receiving the assets, I'm sure they take that into account when they provide a price for performing the activities. But as a whole, for the oil major taking a decommissioning project from start to finish, it will be costing them money for sure. Yeah, think about it. They've got to do all the preparation works. They've got to do all the decommissioning of the platform. They've got to do the plug and abandonment. They've got to do the cleaning. They've got to do tidying up all the platforms, remove all the platforms, and then take it back to shore.
There's a question. It's anonymous. There's a big push to reduce costs of decommissioning. Do you think this push reduces costs Do you think this push to reduce costs possibly increases the overall risk to the market in terms of possible incidents?
Yep. Not that I've been involved in. We'll leave that one there. On a serious note, I can't think of one off the top of my head, and it's definitely not one I've been involved in. We've had, on every project, there's things that maybe happen, but there's nothing been catastrophic or anything like that. As I said, I've been involved in one where there was a fire, but again, that was more a health and safety issue than it was a risk of damaging the asset or, so yeah, no, not that I'm aware of.
Would you say assets which are on sea-based certain debt are harder to assess, harder to assess?
Yeah, so the question in the room was about subsea assets and ones that are in deep water and about or deeper water and checking the verification. Look, in terms of verifying the lift points, it's still the same activity. Sure, the deeper water you're in, the trickier it is. But as soon as you get the verification, then to me, there's not a difference in the risk profile. You need to get the verification first, and then they're good. So it's probably harder to get the verification of the lift points and how you want to lift it. But as soon as you're doing that, the risk profile will change in mind.
Just how do you define verification?
Yeah, so basically that the structure of the lift points are sound in order to be reused to lift. And that's generally done by kind of visual inspection when it's subsea. And then we put in plenty of redundancy and reserve factors. Yes, Phil. Okay, yeah, so the question in the room was are the contractors willing to give up their vessels for decommissioning rather than doing a more glamorous job, paraphrasing. Personal opinion, I think as long as they're getting paid, they don't particularly care. It's my personal opinion, but yeah. Any more?
You've mentioned the availability.
Yeah.
That pushing up the cost of hiring new vessels, contracts with new vessels in the event something goes wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, again, yeah, supply and demand. If the demand significantly higher, it will increase the prices for sure. What we're seeing, especially with the offshore wind I mentioned earlier, is the volume of an offshore wind project. You know, they need these vessels for 8 months, 6 months at a time, maybe even longer. And the contractors are keen to sign up to those because it gives them guaranteed revenue income, right? But of course, potentially brings their asset off the market or their vessel off the market. So there is a conflict there that there's not enough vessels really to warrant all the activities at the minute, which I think puts them in a very nice place where they don't have to lower their prices too much.
With the increase in decommissioning activities, they could being spent over the world, is there an increase in specialized work being constructed?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I was just thinking that I answered. I don't know, but I think it's something that would be interesting to look at. And if I was a vessel owner, then I'd be looking at another heavy lift vessel for sure. Yeah, kind of. That.
I know we all see
sure.
For the large as well, specifically for
Pioneering Spirit.
Yeah, Pioneering Spirit, specifically for the massive lifting of top side, like Red Star, that's a Red Alpha, Charlie, Delta.
Yeah.
I've done it in one big lift. Fuel cranes being able to do that.
Yeah, the Pioneering Spirit, for those who don't know, is a significant bit of engineering. And I think this is one of the reasons why I got into engineering, to work on big vessels and lift big stuff. It's what makes me happy. But yeah, the Pioneering Spirit itself is, it's a beast. And yeah, effectively it kind of goes underneath the top side and then lifts it up and then reverses out effectively. But yeah, it's specifically designed have the capacity to do a lot of the decommissioning work.
What's the largest lift? Is it 5,000 tons or something?
So I was trying to think, off the top of my head, I can tell you what the capacity of the Pioneering Spirit is. The Sleipnir has 2 10,000 ton cranes on it. And the other thing HMC have been looking at is like a quad lift. So they put they've used the Sleipnir and the TF doing a 4-point lift actually, which would increase to Sleipnir is 20,000 tons, and then TF is 14,000 maybe. So probably lifting, you could get up to lifting 20, yeah, so probably around that mark.
Yeah.
But it's not one I've been involved in. Yes. Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah, like it. So the question in the room was how much thought was given about decommissioning when they do the installation, and the second question was around verifying weight and the centre of gravity and how difficult that is. So the first part to your question is yes, they do have to think about it in order to get their permit, in order to do the installation and to extract oil. How much thought is put in at that point is debatable. And again, from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, it kind of depends. I've seen ones where it's been a one-liner saying they'll decommission it, and that's pretty much it, right? So, yeah, it doesn't. 20 years ago, I don't think there's a lot more thought than that going into it. In terms of the second part of the question about verifying weight and the centre of gravity, yeah, it can be really tricky. We rely quite a lot on as-built information, or then the operators' weight control reports they will do. So they bring on big bits of equipment, then they'll update their weight control reports, and that's the kind of information we'll use as we're verifying it. And then we'll go through and survey the platform to make sure that those weights are in the places we expect them to be, and then we calculate it. The other thing to bear in mind is when we're doing the rig designing, there are factors involved in that take into account inaccuracies in COGs, or the vertical centre of gravity or the natural centre of gravity of the platform. So we build a picture up which increases our confidence as we go through the operation, or as we go through the design and the analysis of doing the operation, to the point where every lift I've been involved in, we got to a happy space that we were all comfortable with. We knew the centre of gravity was within the centre of gravity envelope as we designed. So yeah. But it can be tricky. I was just did one in the Gulf of Mexico, and it's a complete nightmare trying to verify that, if I'm completely honest with you. But we got there in the end. Because again, it's not just necessarily the total weight that it's a bit technical, but also where that weight is, it then becomes a major driver as well. Yeah, so the question in the room is about how good about records of changing to as-built drawings. Again, completely dependent. I've been involved with projects where it's been pretty tight. I've been in other projects where it doesn't exist. The other thing I've come across with as-built drawings is it doesn't necessarily always have all the stuff on there. So, for example, there was one topside we tried to land on a barge, and it had a plate underneath it which no one picked up. But the issue was, as soon as we tried to land it on the barge, it then kind of completely interfered with the whole sea fastening design. So there's things like that can happen, and that's one of the reasons why I enjoy it, because I think as an engineer offshore, you have to constantly think about what's going on and how you work through the process, because once you took that topside off, there's no going back. So you've got to do something with it. So yeah. Okay, I will leave that there. Oh no, I won't. Let me do one more bit. Here we go. So just to recap for the accreditation, the 4 learning objectives are up there. I'm not going to read through them because I think I've probably eaten into Stanley's time too much. So I'll now hand you over to Stanley to look at the case reports.